Hey, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Email Never Sleeps. We're talking about the power of hygiene data today. And I've got both an iPost partner and somebody who I've known in the industry as my guest. Vince Sersosimo, the CEO and co-founder of Webula. Vince, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about Webula.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Give you some background on Webula. Webula's been around since 2009. We actually started off in the email space as an ESP delivering email. And we very quickly realized that data quality matters and had a big impact on our business, and which led us to start to build out a technology division, which focused on data quality, email hygiene, and threat detection. And we very quickly pivoted away from being the ESP and left it to folks like you, and just focused on the data quality path and building tools and technology to help identify threats.
That's awesome. Yeah. And again, full disclosure, we use Webula here at iPost. They're a partner of ours. They're phenomenal. But, I think if you ask any deliverability person, anybody that probably works in the list verification or hygiene space, or just any email strategist in and itself, they're going to always recommend that you've got clean data to send out and that it should be done on a regular and consistent basis. And we're not here today to talk about whether you should or should not. I mean, the goal is that you should, right? And you should consistently do it. But I think there's a distinct difference that's often lost when we say you need to have good, clean data. And that's the difference between hygiene and list verification. And so I'd love for you to just explain to our audience, Vince, like there's a huge difference. And what
Yeah,
really is that difference? And then what does Webula do?
sure. Sure. Thanks for bringing it up. It's a great topic. And I agree, there's a huge difference. So a lot of companies out there claim to do list validation or list verification, and it's an important part of this step, but it doesn't encompass everything. So you should focus on verification to identify bounces, essentially bounces, right? Is this email address going to deliver? Is it going to bounce? Or is it an unknown or accept all, for an example? And that's an important part of the process. But there are additional steps you could take to really help hygiene your data. And that's what we call hygiene. So getting into things like threat identification and identifying reputation threats or delivery threats, conversion threats, fraud threats, things that would otherwise pass simply the verification process. You need additional layers of detection to help find those other nasties within a given list or a customer list.
What's funny is, a marketer would come to me and say, look, I've cleaned my list. Everything should be good. We're good. And then you send out an email and you get, let's just say, an example of 12% bounce rate or a 30% bounce rate. Sorry, that's my phone, everybody. I'm going to mute this. Oftentimes, sometimes it works. Verification works. But
Sure.
over the last 3 or 4 years, I've noticed that verification obviously doesn't go all the way to a hygiene perspective. And there's a lot of deliverability problems. And someone would say, but wait, it was cheap, right? And they treat data verification or data hygiene as the lowest cost, almost like an ESP, right? The lowest CPM. What would your comment be to someone that just says, I've already verified and cleaned my list and it was X number of cents per million or per thousand or whatever
Sure.
these costs? Like, how would you convince somebody that hygiene's better?
Sure. So I would say verification's a good first step, right? Everybody should, take the path of verification as a first step. It just doesn't cover you overall. So just because you ran your list or your customer base through a verification service, whether it's ours or anyone else's, they're simply looking for a bounce, which is, again, important, but that's just step one. Step two is to go those additional layers to identify things like, those super nasty stuff we're all familiar with, like spam traps or honeypots. There's other things within a database that as emails age and grow older, they can change, right? So people evolve. We've all signed up for those early Hotmail accounts or whatnot, and as time goes on, you may abandon those email addresses, and as they get older or evolve, right, you may switch to a new inbox and spend some more time in that inbox. And as the usage goes down on that original Hotmail, it could, turn into, the ISP could shut it down, could turn it off. It could turn
Yeah.
it to a recycled spam trap down the road. There's a
Yeah.
lot that can happen as email addresses age. So we really focus on that evolution, right? As somebody, starts to spend time away from that inbox, we start to see, gather some junk mail, right? You start to fight back as a complainer.
Yeah.
Eventually, if it gets overrun with just junk, you abandon it. And that's where we see it come through as a recycled trap as an example.
I've often heard the term pinging or email pinging, and a customer asked me about that. Can you explain what an email ping is versus having updating and having a continuous database updating records that are looking for reputation or fraud that threats, things of that nature? What
Sure.
is ping?
Sure. Well, pinging can be a few things, but in most conversations, pinging an email address falls under the verification step, and that's checking with that domain owner, hey, does this username, an email address or inbox, does it exist and is it deliverable? That's typically falling under the conversation of a ping. The hygiene piece and going those additional layers are things like looking for anything from a disposable domain, which we see a lot of. Are you familiar with those? Do you see
Oh
and
yeah.
hear a lot more about disposable domains?
Oh
Those,
yeah.
yeah, those are a growing threat, and they have a malicious intention at their sign up, right? And everybody uses them. It's not you don't have to be a bad guy or a bad person. They have a specific reason or need where someone signs up. They don't want to get maybe the newsletters, but they want to get the free coupon or discount code. So they use a disposable email to get that code. They leverage it. They get their discount. They buy their shoes online or whatever it is. They pass that two-step, opt-in, that double opt-in.
Mhm.
Once they're past that point, they abandon that email address. So, but from a brand, right, or a retailer, you look like the perfect customer, right? You signed up, you used the coupon code, you purchased something, I shipped you the pair of shoes, you go to continue marketing to them, and it just goes into a bottomless pit, or even worse, a public inbox when it's leveraged through a disposable domain company that leverages public inboxes. And now you're sending, whether it's receipt information, transactional information, or it could be PII, could be personally identifiable information that is out there for the public. So it could cause a privacy issue, and they're important to identify and suppress.
So, what's funny is that we talk a lot about retail. We talk a lot about how, people tend to maybe go in cycles. Maybe they hygiene once or twice a year, or maybe it's before a big season. If you're into, excuse me, Mother's Day or back to school or holiday, things of that nature. Somebody that is consistently acquiring email addresses from a variety of different sources. Now, we won't get into the sources. How often should people who send a lot of email really worry about doing a complete hygiene of their subscriber base? What would your recommendation be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say as often as needed, but some general rules here to follow, right? So first, you always want to start with an initial cleanup, run it through, identify, score, segment your list, and then based
Yeah.
off your risk tolerance, you know how to move forward, right? So take the good stuff, move forward. And then you want to implement a service like Webulas for their email hygiene and verification in the form. So as you have users signing up, you could be cleaning them in real time via an API. And then periodically thereafter. So most customers do it once or twice a year or as needed. So watch your deliverability. If you see some, aging addresses and deliverability start to creep in, then it's time to pull the list and reprocess it, clean it up, and move forward with a valid and hygiene list.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I advise a lot of clients is that to um, look at your deliverability stats in your email and great engagement, especially across your top 5 or 10 domains. Be proactive in understanding that there's a dip or something that's happening that, instinctually would say, you know what, we have this new sweepstakes, or we acquired these email addresses from an acquisition of some sort, or through some other database, that maybe we start to see some degradation. Maybe it's time for us to see really how good, clean these email addresses are from this campaign. And so to your point, right, I always say is, if you've got an influx, make sure you clean it,
Right.
hygiene it before you really start to send to it, especially if it was a fairly aggressive campaign, or any sort of what I would consider is a freebie giveaway, right? Give away freebies or whatever, right? People just want to use a bunch of different addresses to see if they win or don't win. Excuse me,
Sure.
and things of that nature.
Yeah.
Um, what
I
about
can
other
think of other examples too, which would be a good time. So also when you're changing any kind of resources or backend, right? Or you're switching ESPs, right? So you're switching to a new provider is a really good time.
Yeah.
So with a lot of the changes in the marketplace, with everything going on with Gmail and getting rid of old email addresses and accounts, it's always a good time to reprocess through hygiene.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I appreciate, or that even if I was an email marketer working on client side, is the level of detail, right? Some reports that come back. And folks, I'm not trying to plug Webula. What I am saying is that we use these in order to make decisions. We know whether or not they're on fictitious domains, or that they're on an international spam list, or that they're .edu and my target audience is not .edu or .gov or .mil. We are able to then take that data that's given to us and be able to make critical decisions to say, yeah, I'm trying to sell the refrigerator. It's probably not going to be going to this type of domain. So that's where I think detail counts, and should always sort of count from that perspective. What about other verticals? What about other verticals like publishing or B2B? How should they utilize data hygiene, or should they?
Sure. I would say everybody should utilize both verification and hygiene. Specifically at Webula, I can only speak for Webula, but we do domestic, international, B2B, as well as B2C. So we're data agnostic from that stance, which is important. I think everybody should be, like we said, cleaning up their lists for sure.
It's funny, the B2B people tend to be hosed all the time at conferences, right? Like, it's not a lot of sessions on them. And oftentimes when you talk to somebody in B2B, they feel slighted. And
Yeah,
so talking about hygiene or verification, they're like, well, I send to all, B2B domains.
sure.
And that's where you're wrong, right? That's where some of these companies like Webula and others can specialize it, right? And they do it, and they do it right. And you have that peace of mind.
I'd like
Yeah,
to talk on that too. So just you bring up another great point. So with B2B addresses, if you're only utilizing verification, for example, you're only going to get a solid response, meaning it's a valid or invalid response on like 50% of a B2B on the B2B email
okay,
addresses, which
okay.
again, the rest are going to come back as accept alls, which are really unknowns, right? Anything outside of valid or invalid is really an unknown response. So that could be a lot of different responses, but they don't really tell you anything. They're not verifying 100% that it's deliverable. Therefore, we would consider it unknown, which again, another reason to leverage
Wow.
hygiene, going that extra mile to identify, hey, is this, it passed verification, but does it carry a reputation threat, a fraud threat, a conversion threat? And
Mhm.
get that additional layer of intelligence so that you could segment your list. And speaking of detail, I think it's an important thing to talk about too as well, right? So when a list is processed through hygiene and verification, specifically in Webula's case, we're providing back all of the initial input with additional columns and intelligence. And the reason why we do that is we break things out into category level threats. But we give all the data back to you so that you could segment your list, essentially giving you, all the business intelligence to make an
Mhm.
educated decision on how you want to move forward with that list. We're not
Yeah.
deleting anything. We're not giving you back, and we're not, destroying your customer list or anything like that. We're simply scoring it and providing you back that feedback.
Whenever I think about an ROI model, right? And we talk to customers, or we talk or hear in the industry about hygiening and cleaning your lists and yada yada yada. There's this pushback around, well, it costs money. And then I'd say, well, yeah, but it could
Right.
also cost you more money.
Sure.
ROI models, anything come to your head, right? Around like, if I invest X versus consequently it could
Sure.
end up. What have you seen from an ROI model? What assurances can you make?
Sure. I would say, how much your customer base worth, right? What's your revenue worth? Only
Yeah.
because everyone's a little bit different. So from an ROI calculation, I'd leave it to you run your own calcs. But the idea is I could tell you horror stories of, companies that have blindly mailed lists and, ended up on a block list or a blacklist and shut down their mailing. And they can't even get, and, HR can't get an offer letter out to a new
Yeah.
hire, and their business literally stops.
Yeah.
So that can be extremely expensive, right? And then you have to go back, start from scratch and rebuild. And that's a painful lesson to learn where, if you're proactive and keeping on top of the hygiene and verification, you could avoid that risk.
Yeah, and I think if we were talking about 10 or even 15 years ago, if you're put onto a block list or something happens and goes wrong, I'm gonna totally botch this, but before you can kind of somewhat pick up the bat phone, right? And say, hey, mea culpa, we did this, it was wrong. Now you can't do that. And to literally get off of this stuff and to start mailing again, that is productive, it's ROI driven, whatever your business model is, it's not so easy to get off this stuff
Right.
anymore. And it takes a longer time. And so you just literally want to bang your head against the wall and say, well, what sort of verification or hygiene have you done? And again, I always say the ISPs of the world don't care who you are. They don't care that you're a Fortune 100 brand. They don't care if you're mom and pop pizza shop. They don't care. They just care about making sure that you send to the highest quality lists. And oftentimes, sometimes it takes a little bit of an issue, a longer term issue. We need to start either thinking about changing our practices and what the things that we do and the mails that we send, and or add in regularly hygiene to our program. So I want to sort of wrap it up with a couple of interesting thoughts. Because Vince, you guys are in a space that's highly competitive. It's like iPost is in a space that's highly competitive. If you had 100 CMOs in front of you right now, and they've heard some hygiene, and they're only, they're like, well, we're going to let other people make the decision. What would be the CEO of Webula? How would you correspond? What were the top things that you would say to this audience to say, man, you need to start doing this, and it needs to be a part of your regular thing? What would you say to these people?
Sure. Well, I would say just that, right? You really should be, taking the time, processing for verification and hygiene. And I would say, even though you have a current vendor, just
Right.
because they claim to provide verification or hygiene or both, I'd highly recommend testing. Grab some vendors. We pretty much all offer some free testing, but you'll see the difference in the product. So you can't just go based off of price, right? With
Mhm.
data privacy being a huge issue, obviously, and concern, it matters who you're sending your client, either your data or your client's data to. So
Mhm.
I would say run it through its paces, provide a test, talk to the company. You want to make sure you're not just signing up with a fly-by-night company that popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Settle on somebody that has a track record, that's been around, that has a proven track record, and checks all the security boxes and privacy. You don't want them, caching your data or repurposing your data in any way. So
Mhm.
it definitely pays to do your due diligence and go with a company that you can trust.
And this is such a great point, Vince. I would add on to that to say, one, verification works. Hygiene, I believe, works better. Start out the verification route. know that you're not going to pay the same because you're not getting the same product, right? When you do hygiene, you are going to pay more money for a hygiene, everybody, right? It's the law of economics. You're getting more because you're getting more. You're getting more. And somebody would say, well, why can't I have just both at the same price? And I'm like, that's not how this works, right? You know, you have to put a value on that email address and say, if for one, it only takes one email address to really put things into danger for your
Right.
email program. And that's not FUD. That's not me trying to, you know, set garbage cans on fire and say, oh my gosh, we're gonna burn the city down. But it's true. And today's hyper vigilant ISPs, today's hyper issues that we're seeing at Yahoo and Google and all the changes that are happening, it pays to hygiene consistently over and over. And I would rather err on the side of caution than anything else. As if you can't get your email to your inbox and something's wrong, guess what happens? Your program implodes from the inside out. And again, it's not fear or uncertainty or doubt. It's the truth. I've seen it happen. You've seen it. You've seen it happen. Any parting words, Vince? Any
You just nailed it, man. I couldn't have said it any better myself.
Yeah. Any predictions for the future of hygiene or for some of the things that you're seeing?
Sure. I would say, with privacy being in everybody's top of mind, I would say, they're only going to start tightening down more and more. And I think that plays right into the verification and hygiene space, keeping a clean database, being on top of your data assets, your data aggregation, your partners, cleaning that. Your customer list is going to become more and more important. So stay vigilant and stay on top of it.
Folks, things are changing in our industry, in email, in digital, and all the way around. My prediction is it's only going to get harder. It's not going to get easier, right? These changes that are happening in our industry are to thwart those that are bad actors, not that are good actors. But you could be a good actor and send out the best looking emails with the best offers, with the best looking creative and the best segmentation. But it boils down to, have you done your due diligence on your data? Not just normalizing data on one end. It's before you press the send button that's going to get a little bit more and more difficult as time goes on. And guess what? This is the benefit for everybody. It's not just the benefit to make everybody roll their eyes and go, gosh, what are the changes now? So I think that's really, really important to know. Vince, man, look, I've always wanted to have you on this. I'm so glad you were able to join. As always, everybody, we give all the deets of everybody. You can connect with Vince on LinkedIn. You can visit webula.com. Everything will be there. I highly encourage. I don't think he's going to turn down an opportunity to help you guys as a brand, whatever we're doing. And I think, Vince, thank you again for joining Email Never Sleeps.
Absolutely, Andrew. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah. Take care, bud.
See ya.